So sometimes when I read the scripture and I try to figure out a sermon out of all of this, it's hard to do. And then other times there's just so much stuff in the story that makes sense of our current times that I don't know exactly which theme to pick. And this Sunday was definitely don't know which theme to pick sort of Sundays. And so I came up with 3 themes and trying to figure out which one of those to choose. And I decided to choose all 3 of them. So, buckle up, folks. This might be even longer than 10 minutes. We don't know. And so here are my 3 themes. The first is this whole idea of looking forward while still being rooted. So that's sort of a whole story in and of itself. The official theme for this Sunday, the second one, is that those who dream persevere. And that seemed to be a very, very fitting kind of theme for right now, because this COVID thing ain't over, folks. We got a ways to go. Someone said the other day that if we continue to vaccinate at current rates, we'll all be vaccinated in 10 years. Don't worry about it. So yeah, persevering is still in there. And then the third theme that sort of brings them together in its own kind of weird way is this phrase that Axel read for us, that the wise men went home by another way. So I've been sort of pondering home by another way this week. So let's start at the beginning, right? So there's this idea in the story about moving forward, about looking forward, right? And it starts with the wise men who followed the star wherever it went. So like, if it went here, they went there, and if it went there, they went there, and away they went. And they didn't know where they were going, except that they were following the star, and hopefully there was going to be a king at the end of it. But ultimately, their journey is toward home, right? That it's not like they got to Bethlehem and they went, well, that's enough of that, and they just stopped, right? They went back home. So it's a long process, but ultimately it's a process of going home, and we don't even know whether they made it home, right? They could have stopped halfway and gone, well, enough of that, I'm just going to settle here, or maybe they broke into a bunch of little groups and headed in different directions. We don't know, right? But we do know that was ultimately their goal. Their goal was to go home. But it's this story about the relentless movement. And at the same time, Matthew wants to remind us that this is all fulfilling prophecy, right? But again, the reminder in that is that prophecy also looks forward. Prophecy isn't about, well, when you get to this point, you've made it, but rather, when you get to this point, here's probably what's going to come next, right? We're always looking forward. As we look forward, and as we read Scripture and try to understand what it means to look forward, it's important to understand that we're not talking about progress. The Bible doesn't work with the notion of progress that we're so used to, right? Because this going forward isn't inevitable. Progress is sort of inevitable. Stuff is going to happen, right? The iPhone 12 just came out. There's probably going to be an iPhone, I don't know, maybe not 13, maybe they're going to go straight to 14, or they're going to give it another name or something like that. But there's going to be another one. And then there's going to be one after that. And then, right, for the rest of our lives, there's probably going to be new iPhones about, 1 or 2 a year. Who knows? And the Bible doesn't also have the assumption that things will continue to get better, right? Like maybe they're going to get better, maybe they're going to get a lot worse. Don't know, right? But in the midst of this idea of looking forward is a sense of calling. There's a sense of participation. There's this notion that whatever it is that may be coming, it's not going to happen on its own, right? It's not like the wise men saw the star and they went, "Ooh, well, hey, king's coming. Let's just sit at home and, see what happens," right? But right? Because, right, in our world, so much of the stuff that happens that we think of as progress mostly is going to happen with or without us, right? Again, the iPhone, doesn't matter what we do, it's going to come out, right? The new things are always going to show up, and better or for worse, not much that we can even do about it. But the Bible always calls us in. It calls us to say, hey, there's a part for you in this story, right? This is much more like a drama, right? Where you get to say, well, I'm gonna fit in this story here. I'm gonna play this part in the story. And again, while there's this sense of involvement in this story that moves forward, there's also a very clear sense in the story of belonging, right? And these two are not opposites, they happen at the same time. There's a sense of place, right? So Jesus shows up, and Jesus is of David's line. So that links him to this old, like 1,000-year-old story, right? Jesus is Jewish, so he's part of these people. Jesus is from Bethlehem. This is his home. And even, right, the next story is going to be Jesus and Joseph and Mary fleeing off to Egypt, right, which connects them to the old story of Egypt and Moses and right, and stuff like that. And also to the fact that there's an ongoing Jewish presence in Egypt. So when, Joseph and Mary go off to Egypt, they're going to find a bunch of Jews there who are perfectly at home there. And they're going to be, home in another place in a lot of ways. So there's this double theme going on here, this idea of moving forward, anticipation, something new, right? But also at the same time, there's a feeling of home. In all of this, the second theme in all of this is persevering, right? And persevering is such a great theme for today, such a great theme for right now, because right, it's a new year, and we want to, right? We want to go, oh, good, we are not gonna miss 2020. It's not like people are going to look back with most of 2020 with great fondness. It's mostly going to be, wow, that was just horrible. And there's a desire, at least in me, there's a desire to say, oh, good, 2021 is here, right? And the vaccine is here. Let's, let's not. So, right, so we got to keep on thinking about persevering as we go into this new year. And this is a story that's all about persevering, right? The wise men, we don't know where they started, right? Out east somewhere. And away they went. And we know they persevered because they got there, but we know mostly the biggest clue that these were men who persevered is that they chose at some point to stop and ask for directions. Because right? That at least one of the wise men said, oh, look, if we just keep going, somewhere ahead, the kid will be there. And at least another one of the wise men or somebody in the group said, like back there, we should have turned left instead of turning right. We should go back there and turn left. But eventually the wisdom of the group decided that, no, we're actually going to stop and ask. Right? And anytime you get a group of men who stop and ask, that this is serious persevering, right? And the story also continues with Joseph and Mary persevering, right? Persevering like all the way to Egypt and back. Well, I don't know when the last time was you walked from Israel to Egypt and back, right? But it would take a lot of persevering. It's a long drive. It would be a lot of persevering to drive that far today. Never mind, hop on a camel and away you go. And so the persevering, right, in all of this is part of the participation. This is a story that calls to us, that calls us to be part of the story and calls us also to persevere, right? And this sense of persevering is much more than just hanging in there, right? It's felt a lot to me this last while, like it's really important, like let's just hang in there and then the vaccine will come and right? But hanging in there doesn't get you very far, for me at least. It's like I can hang in there for a while, but after a while, it just isn't enough, right? And it's not persevering. Persevering means to keep on doing your best. And that's really hard, right? So because, stuff moves online and you can let things slide, right? And stuff, people don't come into your house, so, housekeeping doesn't really matter. And, you don't get company for meals, and so, let's just eat the same thing over and over again. And, we know things are bad in the community, but, we really don't, have to notice because we don't leave our houses. And so there's a lot of, keeping on doing our best, keeping on really persevering is a hard thing. It's worth recognizing that this call in the scriptures and this call that comes to us through our faith is not an easy thing to do, and is worth doing. So there's our first two themes. And our third theme sort of brings them together. This whole idea of going home by another way, right? And this is the theme we get from the wise men, right? Where they got to Jesus, and then they got warned in a dream not to go back to Herod. Don't tell him what's going on, right? And I mean, they were looking forward to going home, right? Presumably. Because that's in some ways their goal all along, to go there and then to get back home. And it's always nice when you get somewhere and you need to go home that, well, you've been down the road once already, the way back is always simple because you sort of know what to expect. And then to suddenly have to do it another way, right? And it's not like they've got a lot of side roads in the ancient world, right? There's not a lot of options. Going another way, when you don't have a map, and you don't know exactly where you're going, you're trying to do all this, I don't know. Doesn't sound like it would be much fun. And Jesus also gets home by another way, right? Him and his family, mostly his family, right? He just sort of gets carried along at this point, right? They're off to Egypt, and then they're coming home to Bethlehem. That's Matthew's version of the story, that home is Bethlehem. And then the angel comes to Joseph and says, nope, not Bethlehem, Nazareth. And so even when they go home, they don't go home. They go to somebody else's home, and they have to make home all over again. In a lot of ways, I think about Morgantown Church of the Brethren as home by another way. This church is now officially 119 years old. And in many churches that are this old, it means that most of the folks, or many of the folks in the church, are legacy members. They've been here generation after generation. But when I think about the folks who are on Zoom, or even just generally part of the church, and how many of us had our grandparents come to this church? Or how many of the people here were their grandparents part of the church? And I think the answer to that is Scott. As far as I know, he's the only person here this morning, right, whose grandparents were part of this church. Now we do also have the three generations of Andersons. I know that, yeah, right? But Carol isn't like a long-term member here. So we could, it's great to have the three generations of Andersons here. So I don't want to make light of that at all, right? But it's not the norm here. It's not.
You missed Will.
Missed Will.
Pardon me?
Mm-hmm.
Will.
But Will's grandparents weren't in church here.
Yes.
Yeah, they were.
They were?
Helped founded it.
Who founded it? Yes.
Yeah, they helped build the actual building.
Didn't know that. Sorry about that, Will.
Yes.
My dad's parents.
Oh, wow. I thought I knew that history better. Apparently I didn't.
Well, you're gonna have to start from scratch now, Wes.
Oh man. Well, let me start at the beginning. So anyway, right? But for the rest of us, right? We got two legacy members, plus Tom. This sense of being part of Morgantown Church of the Brethren is for many of us home now. But it's not home the way we expected. If you think back to like half your life ago, however long that was, whether that was, like 10 years or 20 years or 40 years, I'm guessing most of you half your lifetime ago didn't expect to be at Morgantown Church of the Brethren, right? But here you are. And here you are, and for many of you, yeah, this is home. And how much better that is than just being lost. I know for some of you, this is also just a stop along the way, that you don't expect to be here in 5 years or in 10 years. Right? But even then, home can be a temporary thing, and that's a great thing. Right? Being home, going home, doesn't always mean going back. Because for many people, home is not a safe thing. Home is not a welcoming place. Home isn't a refuge. It's a place, that you don't want to go to. And yet, there's a feeling, I think, in most of us that we want to be home, right? And if you can't go back home, that means you have to go forward home. And hopefully this is becoming a place where people, and really has long been a place where people go forward to home. Which links us, I think, to the initial theme or the earlier theme of persevering, right? That we need to continue to search, that we need to continue to be home to one another and to our larger community. And I also want to link that to communion as we go to communion, right? That this idea of going home via another way, right? Or even our earlier theme of looking forward while being rooted in tradition, right? That this morning as we take the bread and the wine, Jesus is looking forward, right, in the initial communion service. He's looking forward with fear, right? And we don't, there's not a lot of notions of his, exactly how he's feeling at this time, but he knows that, right, big things are coming. But at the same time, still rooted in tradition, right? And bread and wine, in so many ways, are great things for persevering, right? It's just sort of basic food. It's the stuff that gets you through your day. That's the kind of food that bread and wine is. So it's very much persevering kind of food, right? And then finally, we gather electronically these days, metaphorically maybe, but we gather around a table. And in so many ways, in virtually every tradition in the world, as far as I know, home is something that happens around a table. Now, I know many of my Ghanaian friends would go, no, that's not how it happens, right? But, you know, in our context, home is something that happens around a table. It happens around food. And even if you're like new to the gathering, when you sit down and you eat together, it creates home. So that's what we want to do now, is we want to go to communion and create home here and give ourselves the strength to continue to persevere in these difficult times. I'm going to try something new here. I'm actually going to try to see if we can get some black